I'm Micah Brenner. This is Eric Anderson.
Yeah, excited to jump in and do another one of these. We're gonna get into the Lion King today. For those that don't know us or what we're doing, we're talking about kid stories and breaking them down in ways that we think are interesting.
And today we're doing, what oddly enough, when I was young and it came out, I didn't love it.
Nah,
And now that I'm older, I really, really do. And we are doing The Lion King today.
yeah.
And what do you want to say about it? What do you
I mean,
recall?
okay, so it's from I think this stretch of Disney movies from the 90s they talk about as like the golden age of Disney movies where they were just like, I mean, they've aged so well as I look back at them now. It was like, it's like a 4 or 5 year run of like Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, and Aladdin all kind of back to back to back, and they were like massive star power in all of them, and music. They're winning all the Oscars, and they hold up incredibly well. These are the ones that like I constantly look back with my kids, and when I'm talking with my wife, I like, all right, what's my kind of Disney top five list? Like those three are usually right up there. Lion King might be number one for me,
Yeah.
um, just because I think there's so much packed into it. And yeah, I mean the score is awesome, the animation's great, the emotions that come through it, not just the scenes you normally think of with like, Mufasa's death, which we'll get into, but it I don't know, it's a great one.
Yeah, it's solid, and I will admit, like I haven't looked into, there's a lot of talk about how like, oh, it's actually a remake, like the story is stolen from another story and all that, and I honestly have not looked into that one bit because I kind
Yeah,
of
I'm
don't
sure
care.
we'll get some critiques on that. I'm kind of with you. And
Yeah,
like, okay,
yeah,
it's
I'm
it's a story that's been retold in a bunch of different ways. That's crazy. Like, who does
yeah,
that? Like, only the
yeah.
greatest
When does
stories
that
ever
ever
get that
happen?
treatment, right? Yeah.
Yeah. If only someone would write a story about the hero with a thousand faces that
Right,
told us,
exactly.
the
What's
root
that
of all
about?
this. But yeah, I remember, I guess the privilege of growing up in that prime time of,
Yeah,
Little Mermaid came out when I was little, and like,
yeah,
and that was really the start of this golden era
right.
where they had, as an animation studio, they leveled up. As storytellers, they leveled up. I think that behind the scenes, there was the internal memos that later became that guide in that book, The Hero's Journey,
Oh,
which
interesting.
was based around Joseph Campbell's work. But
Right.
it was, if you will recall the pamphlet that Jerry Maguire handed out, right?
Okay.
There was, this might be legend, this might be myth, I don't know, but my understanding from the preface and my investigation in like the actual story structure is, and I can't remember his name, that's a crime, but the guy that wrote The Hero's Journey, it started
Hmm.
as an internal pamphlet that he passed out to coworkers
Oh,
within Disney. The difference is he did not get fired. He was not played by Tom Cruise. But what it did do is it revolutionized, it became how they went about constructing their
yeah,
stories, which then informed this golden era of massive expansion in the
yeah,
quality and the reach
right.
and the box office, most specifically.
Yeah,
Like, I think that the huge fiscal success that Disney is currently destroying
right.
came from that moment when this
Moving off of
became
that. Yeah,
this, where they're like, we are dedicated to story and story structure in a
right.
way that is committed to, time proven mythological
Yeah,
structure.
yeah,
And so Little Mermaid, and like you said, all these bangers came out. It's like they
yeah,
could not make a bad one. And
right.
Lion King came out. And in Lion King, for context historically, like it
Yep.
strayed away from others in that it was not what you might call like a Hans Christian Andersen
Oh,
or
sure.
sort of
Yeah.
Western European
It wasn't
rooted.
already a fairy tale that was in circulation that everyone already
Yeah,
knew that they were
yeah. And
adapting.
so if it is derivative of another fairy tale, which I haven't looked into, it's one that isn't part of that sort of
Sure.
northern Western
Yeah.
canon.
Yeah.
And it departed in that it was the musical duo that was largely responsible for the smash hit Oscar-winning soundtracks.
Yep.
I think one of them had died, and again, I might be wrong, but my colloquial memory is one of them had died during the AIDS crisis of the
Okay.
90s, which is also interesting. It also sets this into sort of American history
Sure.
of that era,
Yeah.
because that isn't super common for people now to have like, oh, this artist hero of mine just died of AIDS. And back then,
Right.
you'll remember with
That was
me
a
that
thing.
it
Yeah.
was pretty common. You'd be like, oh, that
Yeah.
actor died. Oh, that musician died. Oh, that
Right.
performer died. Like
Right.
it was crazy.
Yeah.
And so he succumbed to that. And so they brought in Elton John, and it was like,
Hmm.
holy shit.
Right. Right.
And
Well, because
so
it was, I mean, and the music in this one, I mean, Elton John was the songwriter for a lot of it, and then like the score is Hans Zimmer, so it's like you got top shelf guys that like
yeah.
only Disney could pay that much to get those guys
Right.
doing it.
Well, and even then, Hans Zimmer, I think, was not
He was new, he was up and
not
coming,
who he is
but
now.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true. How old were you when this one came out? Because you're a little bit older than me.
Yeah. So I was born in 1980. And so this came out in what? 90. We should have this information in front of me. This is criminal.
I think it was
Um,
96 or whatever. I know we're unprepared.
yeah.
That's
And
fine.
so,
That'll be a theme here.
yeah, 94. Okay.
94.
So
Got it.
so it probably hit theaters summer of 94 or maybe 95.
Yeah.
Sometimes the date doesn't
Yeah.
represent when it actually hit theaters. So I was like 14 or 15, old enough to be like jaded and super self-righteous and think that I'm
Interesting.
super cool.
Okay.
Because there were things about it where I was like, oh, they really phoned in the backgrounds and like just got kind of dumb about some of the musical numbers.
I see. I was a lot younger. I was 7, 8. So I
Okay.
remember it was all like my
Doesn't blow
sister
your
really
damn
like,
mind.
can you feel the love tonight? I'm like, oh, it's a girl song. Like, I don't know. Like
It's just a kissing book.
that was where my mind was at 7 years old.
Yeah.
So, which I think that song is unbelievable
Yeah.
now, that whole
It's so
sequence,
good.
but
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
more that we'll get into. So yeah, want to go through what happens in this movie?
What if we jump right to kind of where we see the themes? Because I think we're coming
Yeah.
with two different
Yeah.
like hypotheses today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe like give me your hypothesis and I'll give you mine, and then you go into like fleshing yours out. I'll go into fleshing mine out, and we'll get
Yeah.
what occurs will come out
Yeah.
as we talk about it.
Yeah, no, that's good. So, I mean, I've always thought of this movie as, I mean, it's certainly a hero's journey type thing, but the thing that always keeps coming back to me, it's not exactly a prodigal son story, but it always feels like it to me.
Okay.
It's
So
not without the like, Dad, I'm actively rebelling against you, although there's a bit of that. Like I gotta run away and go live and indulgence and partying, which is a big part of the kind of second act of the movie.
mhm.
Ultimately realizing like I have to come back and take responsibility for what's in front of me. And then there's a repentance piece of that as well. That's always kind of framed my thinking around that. It doesn't exactly
Okay.
fit, but
Yeah.
it's I mean it certainly goes through, I would say, a lot of elements of kind of like hero's journey and realizing like a need for coming back and taking responsibility. Again, it doesn't perfectly fit each of those, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
I see a lot of different stuff fragmented in it through there as well. There's also a pretty long Jordan Peterson lecture where he like compares all the stages of Carl Jung's psychology through the lens of this movie, which is pretty fascinating. But
Yeah.
so I
Oh man,
I
I
kind of
haven't I
pulling
haven't
for
seen that one. So
it's like 2.5 hours long. It's great, but
okay,
it's
only 2.5.
only 2.5, right? I
Yeah,
think it's
because
maybe
Pinocchio
a
is
little longer.
12, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, but I mean, there's like the journey, it's a coming of age story ultimately, like what Simba goes from being a young uh naive, overly eager kid, very, entitled royal kind of thing, to losing everything, to he goes off and uh uh meets some new buddies and parties in the jungle and smokes pot and all the stuff, whatever the jungle
Yeah,
equivalent of
yeah,
that would be.
yeah. Timon and
And
Pumbaa
then,
are definitely like your
oh,
frat
there is stoner buddies
party
for sure.
boy, like your
There is
guys
stoner
that you
buddies.
you share a
Yeah.
house with in Burbank, and
Yeah.
yeah,
And then he, which is like what he kind of needs at that time to pick him back up and get his life going. And then, Nala comes back and tells him like, what are you doing? Like,
yeah, yeah,
you've been alive this whole time, and turns out
yeah,
like everyone else is starving. Like, get back there and assume your kingdom.
yeah.
And
Well, and I
then
also love that the invitation is attached to like, oh, I've been having a great time, but I forgot about mating.
right,
And
yeah,
now I realize, oh, I really do want that. Really
yeah.
want mating, and like, oh, that's right. Like, what's so funny is like only Disney could have a lion give bedroom eyes, and you're like,
Oh,
oh,
totally.
dang, Nala's fine, and it's like,
Right.
what's wrong with me? Like, why am I attracted to this lion? Uh,
I think
and
there's a scene in there's a spot in the Peterson lecture where he pauses on Nala's bedroom eyes and he's like, everyone knows what that means, right? And it's like, but it's I mean, it's that moment where he realizes like, you want to be like a grown up here, you want to like grow up and be
yeah,
worthy of the girl, like go take your kingdom back. Like
yeah,
you
yeah,
don't get to do that if, because
yeah,
Nala's just giving him shit the whole time. Like, what are you doing out
yeah.
here? Like, well,
The
like I'm happy to see you, but then like she really
yeah,
like kind of digs into him, and that's
and I'll
the
tell
fun
you what
part.
I wish for every. There's like two conversations that come immediately to mind when I think of some of the tightest romantic conflict dialogue in existence.
Yeah,
And one of them is that segment, that exchange between Nala and Simba
yeah,
when they're shooting back and
yeah,
forth. You
yeah,
sound just like my father. Well, at least one of us does. And it's
yeah.
like
Right.
every single line of dialogue in that. I would love to see all the drafts it went through, but it got
Mm,
tightened to the most concise, succinct, with the
yeah,
most subtext
yeah.
possible. I mean, that is stellar dialogue.
It's so
So
good. Yeah.
I can only hope that the people that contributed to that dialogue get to hear my praise, because they deserve, like, they should know. I think that's one of the all time great scenes. That one, and the fight that John and Holly McClane have in in that little room right before
Ah,
the terrorists take over
yeah,
and Die Hard,
yeah.
when they have one of the most concise married conflicts you've ever heard,
Mm,
and they don't actually talk about anything. Like, if you try to, you
right.
know what I mean? It's like
Yeah,
there's like, oh, there's 7 years of conflict behind every single one of those lines of
yeah,
dialogue. Anyway,
yeah, yeah.
total sidebar. But yeah, she comes in and she goes like, hey, on the other side of boyhood is a woman like Nala. And
Hmm.
so if you would like to get over this, adolescence
Yeah,
and step into manhood,
yeah,
there's the potential for, I mean, ultimately paradise, and then
right,
also romantic relationship with Nala.
right.
And
And
yeah,
it's cool because that part is coming right off of like the Hakuna Matata song where he grows up physically, like you see,
yeah,
and then it goes from Jonathan Taylor Thomas voicing Simba to Matthew Broderick, and he's singing
yeah,
in, the high tenor, and now he's kind of like the cool guy, but he's still very much like this adolescent dweeb. He's not
yeah,
really a grown up until Nala comes and says,
yeah,
um, "What's wrong with you? Like,
yeah,
get back to your life." And then he even runs away from her, and then he has this whole
yeah,
uh trip with Rafiki, which that the dialogue in that scene is like,
yeah,
it feels like this is going to sound overly heavy, but it feels like it's speaking out of like scripture, what Rafiki says to Simba, like
yeah,
reminding him
yeah,
who you are,
yeah.
and that he knows him even though like Simba doesn't recognize Rafiki at all.
Hmm.
That's I think, I mean, that's Simba's transformation packed into like that 20 minutes of
Yeah.
it. I think
And preceded by, we see in the conversation with, of course we're jumping around with the events, but like preceding with his conversation around like they're rolling around in the grass looking at the stars, and we see like, oh, there's this thing that's like set apart about Simba is he has, and so your hypothesis is that there's a prodigal son story going on. My hypothesis is that it's actually an end times story of the church. I think it's an end times story about the redemption of man is what I think is the story. And so there's this moment where we see like, oh, Simba's set apart. He has this faith, like he has this connection to the creator and creation that the others don't.
That's at the beginning of the story?
Well, no, when they're lying in the grass looking at the stars.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Burning bowls of gas, millions, and so he's like connecting with his father and creation in that moment, and they ridicule it, they laugh at him.
I always thought those were the kings of the past. That's so stupid, Simba. What do you think?
Yeah,
like, I know it's pretty dumb,
and they laugh, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm dumb," and it's like, and he's ridiculed for his faith in essence. And so what I see as the pattern is that Mufasa represents sort of the father and the son.
Okay.
And he kind of represents the Godhead. Rafiki, you could potentially say, represents like the Holy Spirit in a way, in that he operates with the wind, right? So there's like that kingdom of God is like the wind kind of thing. And so the wind is what continuously connects him with the events and allows him to like communicate. And that we have this idea, much like in like the church age, like so in the Gospels of the Christian Bible, Jesus ascends and he leaves. Yeah, and he's like, I'm out of here, but I won't leave you alone. Like I'll leave you with a helper, right? So Mufasa's gone. There's still Rafiki in the world. There's still the wind, right? So there's still that. And then you have sort of this remnant of mankind who is made in the image of Mufasa, who has been empowered and given. And so that's Simba. And so Simba in this this hypothesis is us, is man, is mankind, man and woman in his image and left stewardship of the planet. And then we abdicate that stewardship to, obviously, God and Jesus and Satan aren't related, unless I think there are some sects of Mormonism that do believe that they're related, but that's not what we're talking about. Yeah. So, and that's the Hamlet thing, right? Like the uncle steps in, but
there's a bit of Cain and Abel too.
Exactly. The brothers that hate one another. One of them, everything goes right. The other one, everything goes wrong. And so then it is in God's image. This man goes into exile, leaves the kingdom to the enemy. The enemy drives it into the ground, runs amok. While in exile, the remnant remembers their calling, is called back. They return in the image, and so it's almost like it's like the second coming. It's like so and all the way down to where the devil Scar gets cast into a lake of fire. Oh yeah, and consumed right by his own creatures that live in that lake of fire. Yeah, and then the earth, the pride lands are restored. Yeah, the same way in Revelations, this idea that a lot of Protestants fundamentalists have that we like go away to heaven forever. It's like, well, that's not in the book. Like in the book, heaven comes to earth and earth is remade. And so that's sort of what happens at the end of Pride to the Pride Lands is they get remade into this paradise with a restored steward.
It feels like a baptism kind of thing too. It's all the
Totally.
rains come, it washes away
Right.
all the
Yeah. There's
death, all the
fire.
destruction, all yep,
There's floods. There's
yep,
disease.
yep,
Right. So you kind of get the whole like end
yeah.
times bingo card, and then yeah, and then it washes away every tear.
Yep.
And so that's my hypothesis, is that it's sort of like Lord of the Rings. It's like an end times story
Interesting. Okay.
more than it is, like the traditional heroic death and resurrection Christ story.
Sure. Sure.
But obviously,
I,
there's a lot of everything in there. The
I
same
mean,
Lord of the
you can,
Rings, but
that's my thing about it is like, there's so much I can slide. So like, as I'm watching this with my kids, I'm like, oh, that's this biblical story. Oh, that's Hamlet. Oh, it's like, there's just
yeah,
all that stuff that just consistently jumps off the page, which is why for me in this one, it's hard to narrow it down to like, this, even like, prodigal son take, like, it's like, I see the elements of it, right? But it's not all that. And I
right,
see the elements of all this. It's just, there's so much to it.
right, yeah, yeah, and it's hard for me to connect it. Like, I get why it could be a Christ story, because Simba like dies when he goes into exile,
Hmm.
but
Yeah,
not
it's
really.
I don't see Simba as really Christ. It's more of
Right,
Simba's like conversion story.
right, right. And it could be
This
like a lineage death and resurrection, because
sure,
Mufasa
yeah,
dies
yeah,
and
yeah.
Mufasa is
He's
reborn
resurrected,
in
yeah,
Simba.
right.
But
And there's all this the great kings of the past, and that's
yeah,
Mufasa's now that, and the sun's gonna set on my time, it's gonna rise on yours, and then
yeah,
he eventually has to, take up that mantle. I know we're jumping around a bit, but you said the thing about like Scar getting cast into the lake of fire as an end times thing. My thing about all the antagonists demise and how like
yes,
Scar ends up dying, right? So it's like that scene's really interesting because they have like this big epic battle on top of Pride Rock, right? And the fires all around, very much kind of like image of hell. There's even like a little light and dark symbolism going on.
yeah,
Scar is all dark, Simba is all light, and it's there's this kind of yin yang thing happen there. Um, but then, so how does Scar get defeated? He jumps out of the flames at Simba. Simba off of his back flips him on himself down
right,
into the pit where he gets eaten by all the minions, right?
yeah,
Um, and it's a like because Scar's whole thing is he's not the biggest, he's not the toughest, he's manipulative, he's
right,
deceptive, he
right.
turns everyone against each other in
He's the
order to
accuser.
yes,
Just
exactly.
right. He
Yes.
accuses
Yep.
Simba of his
Yeah.
sins in that moment.
You killed your father, and Simba feels really
Right.
bad, even though like he knows like that's all like a lie. So like Simba's even got to confront his own
Yeah.
lie that he's come to believe. And so he has to he flips that lie, he flips the accuser on itself,
Hmm.
and then it's exposed, and then all of his lies catch up to it and eat him alive.
Yeah.
Um,
And also in that moment, worth noting is that the move, like the physical maneuver that
yeah,
Simba uses, is
yeah,
one that he has had used against him by
yes, yeah,
Nala since their childhood.
yes,
And
yeah,
so in that moment, it's the divine integration of the
totally,
masculine and the feminine, where he's like, oh, my redemption in the eyes of Nala and the lionesses,
yeah,
and my integration, my humiliation
yeah,
is now my strength, where
yeah,
he's able to take Nala's move and
right,
actually win at a wrestling match,
yeah, right.
uh, and uh, and to
Which is
find
what's
victory in that
which is
moment.
what's so cool and so subtle about like I think this age of movies that there's like
Hmm.
it's so specific. There's no way that was just an accident. But that's the type of thing it's
Yeah.
like when I'm little and I just it goes over your head already. You
Right.
kind of did
Yeah.
it.
You don't
And
even think about it.
look at all the little things that are happening there.
Yeah.
Like there's so much that lines up there. It's really cool.
And that is something that's unique about animation,
Hmm.
particularly in the era where it had to be done by hand, frame by frame.
Yeah.
The amount of concentration and focus and the number of people contributing to it sort of makes like this hyper meta project where you can't really do things by accident. And one of the
Hmm.
beauties of going to a play or watching, professional wrestling or even making
Yeah.
a live action movie is that sometimes accidents will come up and that's awesome.
Yeah.
But the accidents that happen in creating animation happen in slow motion over protracted periods of time, and
Right.
they get
Right.
honed and they get workshopped, and they like when you see,
Yeah, that's a great point.
usually movie animated films will have two directors because it is such a protracted and complex process.
Right.
And so there's those two directors, but also all of the story artists are contributing because they just try
Hmm.
random crazy stuff. And you don't get to do that all the time with a live action film, and you definitely don't
Yeah.
get to do it with a play.
Right.
And so you get all these contributions, and so you
Yeah.
sort of like you hyper evolve a story because you have
Yeah.
such concentrated iteration. And so for all we know, that move, like that
Yeah.
aspect, just came from some random artist who was
Right.
inspired. They contributed their inspiration
Yeah.
to the overall project, and it channeled through. And which is why you can spend 12 hours talking about Pinocchio,
Right.
because it has thousands and thousands of man hours and woman
Yeah.
hours put into it, much like a cathedral.
Right.
And so you'll have like an architect, and it's like, yeah, but like at some point there's probably some random mason who decided to shape the
Totally.
brick this way,
Yeah.
and the architect went, brilliant,
Yeah.
like so.
This movie, more than any other, at least what comes to my mind, is that the visuals the visuals of the characters and the emotion that comes through them, especially with this animation style, like I don't see that in any other, I mean, even in any other like Disney level movies, like the the just kind of like you mentioned the sexual desire that Nala shows, the um tough but like kingly appearance of Simba, the like predatory nature of Scar, like all of that just jumps off the screen in just the way those characters are animated and
Mhm.
just the way they interact, the expressions on their face, like it's so specific and you feel it. I mean, it's subtle, but like you're not always conscious of it, but like it I don't know. I haven't seen that in any other movies.
And it's also worth mentioning, like all the vocal performances are so good.
Yeah.
Jeremy Irons is,
Yeah.
I mean, he's just one of the all-time greats, and to have him
Right.
in that role, like he's so good. And
Right.
then even like James Earl Jones, it could even be what you'd consider like, just typecasting, but
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 who
he's
else does that
so
role?
good as Mufasa, is like it's not, it isn't typecast. It's like exceptional even within his type. And
It's just like
um,
that's the right. I I don't know
yeah,
who makes that role any. People could
right,
do like different takes on it, but like
yeah,
it's not. You're not like you don't get the essence of Mufasa if it's
yeah.
not the
Well,
James
and
Earl Jones
so
voice.
yeah, and case in point with when they made the remake and they did everything in their power to destroy all the vocal
Yeah.
performances
Yeah. Yeah.
quality. Even then, they still knew
Yeah.
it obviously has to
That
be
that
James
was,
Earl
that was
Jones.
the
Like,
one they're like, we're not gonna mess with, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's the only one that we're gonna bring back, which is like, man, you even replaced Rowan Atkinson. Like,
I know. We have Rowan Atkinson
Rowan's
as Zazu is so good.
he's
Like,
perfect. He's still
yeah,
around. It's not like you can't get him back, but
they replaced him with
so,
John Oliver, which was like, all right, that's a take.
okay, yeah, I
Yeah,
guess. Like,
another
yeah,
British guy. Okay, like,
yeah. You want to talk about stereotyping? Like, we just need a British guy with a big nose, right? Um, and uh, the character models are so good. Like Zazu does look like Rowan Atkinson. He's got like
yeah,
the bushy
yeah,
eyebrows and everything.
yeah.
Um, and I don't know if it's worth mentioning the remake, um,
Mm.
because I think it's so passable. And uh,
I mean, it's how most of the remakes are. They're just
yeah,
they're
yeah, I think it
versions
did.
of like the thing that actually is good.
Yeah, it did one thing really, really remarkably, which was make it look like lions.
Yeah,
And
yeah. It looks
it,
like lions are singing.
Yeah, it
They
looks like a
accomplished
bunch
that.
of like sexless lions because they couldn't put in genitals. And
Right.
other than that, it looks like a Nat Geo special. Like it's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
But I think for that reason only, I don't think anything else about it
Hmm.
needed to be made. I thought their attempt at casting only people of African lineage for the Lions was weird, and it's
Yeah.
like, well, you didn't cast Kenyans because this does take place in Kenya, uh, and you didn't cast lions,
Yeah.
so nor did you cast Africans. You just
Right.
cast people whose families at one point originated from Africa, which supposedly all of our families originated from
Right.
Africa if
Well,
you
it
just go
just
back
it
far enough.
I feel like once you start doing that, like you're telling a different story, right? So it's
Yeah,
like that now this thing is which happens like all over the place in these movies that are coming out now. Like it just fragments. It's like there's kind of this
yeah,
thing with the cast, right? And then there's like this lesser version of the music, and then you added this other song that's also in the play, and then
yeah,
you kind of have this old same throwback to the movie that you loved originally. It's all
yeah,
like I don't know what this is. It's just a bunch of
yeah,
different stuff that's kind of like hey, remember that thing, but also here's something that's new, and here's a new message from
yeah.
like
It
modern times. It doesn't.
Yeah, it becomes an process of pandering, and then they also there was also an insertion of what I want to call like a victim narrative for Scar,
Oh yeah, yeah,
which I think is worth mentioning just in terms of like our theme of how villains
right.
are portrayed and how they get their
Yeah,
comeuppance and all that in all
yeah.
of these movies. And so this attempt to sort of retcon Scar in a way that he's sympathetic in
I don't
his.
remember that piece. Was Scar like he was bullied by Mufasa or something?
It's a little bit like he got his scar, like he has been scarred by his relationship to Mufasa, and that he's always been second fiddle, and that like
Which
and
that's
it,
very Cain and Abel too, by the way. Like,
right, but also like
but
who cares?
you don't feel
He's still the
sympathy
bad
for
guy,
Cain in that, right? Like Cain
right?
is like, no, he's the one who's like not
Yeah,
showing up the way he should, right? It's not he's
yeah.
not a sympathetic figure.
Yeah, because the thing with Cain and Abel is that at all any reasonably self-examining person has experienced a time where our greatest offering and our greatest efforts were not acceptable to, let's say, the fabric of creation. Like
Right.
it did not pan out the way we thought
Right.
reality should pan out
Yeah.
based on what I put into it.
Right.
And the reasonable thing is certainly not to murder your brother in order to make it
Right.
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 And so we all know, like, even if I'm in the place of Cain, I still know for sure that the proper way forward is not vengeance
Right.
on the
Right.
fabric of reality.
Right.
We can, we should be able to universally agree on that. But
Definitely.
there's this trend now where it's like, well, we've got to portray villains as really sympathetic, and they all come around in the end. And it's like, well, they don't always.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the vigilance against that thing in humanity which wants to destroy and terrorize out of a sense of um, entitled
Yeah.
victimhood is
Yeah.
it's a good instinct to foster, to be
Yeah.
vigilant against vengeful
Definitely.
entitled
Well,
people.
and I think when you do the story, it makes Scar less interesting because like he's a
Yeah,
good villain. He's
he's
like
a great
he
villain.
is like he's undercutting Mufasa from the very beginning. He's
Uh-huh.
like a predatory uncle on Simba from like
Yeah,
the get-go. He's manipulating him, he's tricking, he's working all of his stuff behind the scenes.
yeah,
Um he thinks he's smarter and more intelligent than everyone else.
yeah, and he
And
is.
and he is, and it
His
leads to
plan
his own
works.
demise, right? Yeah.
And his song, in my opinion, is the best song in the whole thing.
Yeah.
And the way it's done, the way that number is done, like it inverts the color scheme. It turns to
Yeah.
purples and greens instead
Yep.
of like golds and yellows.
Yep.
And it has the goose stepping And it's got elements of the Third Reich, it's got elements of Nazism, and it's got elements of the Turks, and at the very end it's got that like crescent behind him. And so it's like every mass invasion of sort of this totalitarian fascist quality, they're all represented in his efforts, which are all rooted in this spirit of Cain.
Yeah,
just like they are in real life.
And then just how it's happening.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it's all happening behind the scenes while everyone else is kind of blissfully naive to like what's going on until, shit, the king is dead. Yeah. Now I guess this guy's taking over, and now we're in this totalitarian world.
That amazing moment where they're going, "No king, no king, na 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 na," and he's like, "Idiots, there will be a king," and it's like. Every anarchist, every like revolutionary that's like, and then there'll be no king. And it's like, what planet are you on? Like, of course there's going to be a king. And just wait and see who it is.
Right.
And it's so well done. So like closing thoughts on Lion King, or at least on this part, in case we need to read it.
Again, it still holds up as one of my favorites. I think the thing I always note, like, certainly my kids enjoy it. They certainly don't get it at the level of all of this stuff that's going on.
Sure.
I consistently note that whenever it's on and like one of the grandparents is watching it or someone else is there, like someone's always getting teared up. Like everyone thinks of that with like Mufasa's death, like that's a part of it. But like Simba sees Mufasa in the clouds. He takes his place on top of Pride Rock at the end.
Oh, yeah. When he roars at the end and brings back.
Yeah. My dad always, he chokes up at everything, but like that one, he's like, "You're distraught over there. You okay?" I know this one pretty consistently evokes emotion out of the adults who are watching it.
Yeah. I agree. I think one of the litmus tests is like, one is like, do the story dads give it like a stamp of like, this is something that I want to introduce as themes and messages to my family. But then there's also like, are the kids naturally drawn to it?
Are the kids into it?
Is there room for something that I don't think is good to go like, well, maybe my kids are onto something, or maybe they're really not because they're kids.
Right.
Like kids are simultaneously super wise and incredibly foolish. So, and so in this one, I think my kids are drawn to it. If it's on, they're watching it.
Yep.
And I'm drawn to it. If it's on, I'm watching it.
Yeah. And it's one that like you can, if it's on and you step in, like you don't have to, it's very rewatchable. You don't have to like, oh, I missed the beginning, I'm kind of behind. It's just like, oh, cool, this scene. Oh, all right, this song. It's like, it's very easy to step into it like any given part of it. I mean, it's Story Dads, stamp of approval. This one's an easy yes, I think.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, what do you think the next one is with our last minute here?
What do we think the next one is? If we stick with Golden Age, Beauty and the Beast is fun, or maybe we go one that we don't like very much.
Yeah, we could pick one we don't like.
Or
go classic, like 101 Dalmatians.
Oh, that'd be fun.
I do like a rando.
My kids really like 101 Dalmatians. That's a Xerox age.
All right, let's think about it.
Let's think about it. Yeah. 101 Dalmatians, or maybe we do Frozen that we've been teasing too. We'll figure something out.
Frozen's been on a lot around here, so it's fresh. All right.
All right, cool, man.